This is the Inclusion Think Tank podcast brought to you by New Jersey Coalition for Inclusive Education, NJCIE, where we talk about inclusive education, why it works, and how to make it happen. On this episode, I welcome back for part 2 of our conversation, Dr. Jessica McQueston, Assistant Professor at Sam Houston State University. Our discussion continues with how implementing a disability-inclusive curriculum can be beneficial to all students. Let's get into the conversation. So you recently presented a workshop at the TASH conference called How to Include Disability Inclusive Curriculum in the K-12 Classroom. Can you tell us what is a disability inclusive curriculum and what that looks like?
Yeah. I think I've kind of hit on this already, but really, when we talk about disability, we have to think about intersectionality and, you know, that people with disabilities have made huge contributions to society. And some of these like famous people from the past all had disabilities, but they weren't seen as others, or um, maybe they weren't diagnosed at the time. And so we've been able to kind of look back and diagnose them. But um, there's, if you look in the media right now, there's tons of portrayals of negative portrayals of people with disabilities. And so I think when we try to eliminate these stereotypes, we have to examine these assumptions and beliefs and everything else that they're based on. And I think part of that starts with what is taught in schools. And right now, disability is missing from curriculum. And, people with disabilities are one of the largest minority groups in the US. And so, and yet we're not part of the curriculum. We're ignored. And so, I have a few steps that you can take to kind of think about uh, developing and looking at your curriculum and making it more disability inclusive. And so when I say that, I really think about like, how are we recognizing people with disabilities throughout the curriculum? And so one thing that I like to recommend first is to really thinking about evaluating what curriculum you're using and really checking it for ableism. I'm sure most of us can think about like, oh, we've read a book and like the person with a disability is like this hero, right? They're a hero because they did a normal everyday task, right? And it's like, right? And so, and then, or also like, there's some like attitudes and beliefs and other ableist remarks in curriculum. And so I think when we think about doing that, we have to not only be open to changing what we've done in the past, so like breaking out of the status quo. And I feel like over the last 3 years, especially, I've said that, I don't know, probably 9 million times, that we have to kind of break out of the status quo and being open to change. Um, but I think really start with looking at it, looking at whatever curriculum you're using. And it might not even be the whole year. So maybe even just pick one unit or one topic that you're doing and say, like, is there any mention of disability present? Is it superficial? Is it actually um, deep? Is it just a brief mention of one line? Um, and then also think about like, how are the people with disabilities portrayed? Is there, does it further perpetuate stereotypes about people with disabilities? So I think that first step is really taking a hard and honest look at what you're using and kind of evaluating it for ableism embedded throughout. And then I think the next part is really this like design component. And so like really think about what are the units that allow students to learn, I like to say, about and from and with people with disabilities. And so again, recognizing that people with disabilities are the experts and they should be leading this conversation. And so this moves beyond just like a disability awareness day, which is great. And it's that means you still have 10 miles to go
Right.
on this journey. Um, uh, but what you might do is, include some outside materials. So maybe you're doing a unit on, I don't know, the Civil War or something. And so not only do you take the textbook that you have, which also that needs to be, I'm sure, some added
Hmm.
materials, um, but also like bring in some other materials. And um you might look at like some curriculums have these like supplemental texts or resources maybe on their website, or like might be sitting in your storage closet at a school. I worked with the students at NDSU, my previous institution, and she was student teaching in a seventh grade, I think it was seventh grade classroom, might have been eighth grade, but a middle school classroom in history. And they were talking about the civil rights movement. And she looked, and this curriculum had these like extra kind of like short little like 20-30 page like readers on different topics, and that had just been sitting in a closet. And she pulled one out, and it was on the disability rights movement. And so she was
Wow.
able, which is like fascinating, right? And so she was able to bring it into the classroom and like have this rich conversation and like a whole week long like unit on it. And it was like, wow, this is something that would have never happened if she wouldn't have gone looking for it, right? So it was purposely excluded from the main curriculum. And so that's another thing to like kind of take an eye out. I know that that student was really incredible, and she ended up taking like an extra class, like just to learn more about people with disabilities and special ed with me. And she took a grad class. I think it was fascinating. Like talk about like, a change maker in the field. Um, so you might also, if you're talking about like activism, for example, like have you brought in the Capitol crawl of 1990? Um, there's tons of ways to do this. I also think about, you know, we have the internet now, which is a fantastic resource. I've started like over the past year, I've just started like Googling random things. I'm like, people with disabilities in ancient Egypt, people with disabilities in or that are biologists. Just to say like, what are some people that we could highlight? Like, what experiences could we highlight? Because again, 1 in 4 people throughout their lifetime are going to have a disability.
Mhm.
So we need to address this. There's also, and I have a list, I'm going to read it. But the Museum of Disability History has tons of lesson plans out there across different grade bands. Um, and then some other things to think about of like there's different like councils and museums that are a great opportunity to look at. Most are virtual. It's like the Minnesota Council on Developmental Disabilities has some, the Museum of Disability History and Ability is like capitalized on that. The Disability History Museum, which again is different than the Museum of Disability History. And then Everybody, it's an artifact history of disability in America by the Smithsonian Institute, which it is a little bit older, but um, you can also incorporate some of that. So like even just looking
Mhm.
at, you know, what was happening at this time and how can we bring in these like artifacts. But really, I think really starting with like just doing a simple Google search, you can learn so much. Like there's a ton of other resources. Like I could talk on this for another 10 minutes of like what resources are out there. There's whole units on ableism that are out there.
Mhm.
Um, so there is tons out there. I think you just have to look for it and really think about including that into your curriculum. And then also be open to connecting with your local disability resource center or community resource center or other self advocates. So like I taught a 2-3 multi-age classroom, one year, and I connected with the Disability Resource Center in um, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they actually came and did like a presentation for not only my class but the whole school on disability.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it was really cool. And like,
Wow.
yeah, to have like self advocates really like talking about like what does it mean to have a disability? What is it? um it's not something to be scared of, right? And it's just natural and doesn't mean that you can't do anything. um and so really connecting with them too. I mean, most communities will have this, or after the pandemic started, we've really embraced this idea of virtual. So if you don't
Mhm.
have a local resource community center, connecting with one maybe in your state or locally, or not local, but like a little bit broader of a local circle.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I,
The
so I,
resources are out there, like you said. It's
yeah,
really
they are.
just to find it. I know for me personally, we're recording this in February, and it's Black History Month.
Mhm.
So going back to something you mentioned earlier about intersectionality, so I googled being Black and disabled, and
Yes.
the list of people that show up and the different things that the different fields of that they're in, and uh, just learning about different people. So that's something that I've been highlighting on my personal social media accounts this month. Um, so it's really like Google is there, and it's very helpful when used correctly. To
Yeah.
find out such great information, and the resources that you mentioned, um, some of which I haven't even heard of. So I will definitely be looking into this as well. So it's really it's so useful and so helpful, to again, like you said, to identify like the ableist language in the curriculum that you may be using, the books that the students may be reading, and to open up that conversation, to start having a conversation about why this is ableist, why is this an outdated way of thinking, or uh,
Yeah.
how can we possibly change this story a little bit to make the person with a disability a little bit like you said, to not look as scary, because that's a lot of things, a lot of times that happens in movies and books, and
Yeah.
they're thought of as the scary person. um so it's like,
Yeah.
how can we get away from that, and improve, again, going back to improving the language that we use when we talk about those who are disabled and have disabilities. Um it's really it's really interesting. Like, when you think about, I think about the books that I've read, coming up in school, that had
Mhm.
disability represented in the stories, and it's like, oh wow, that was supposed to be the scary character, and the person
Right.
everybody
Yeah.
stayed away from, and they didn't look in their direction, and it's like, oh
Yeah.
wow, like it's
Yeah.
really
Well,
a shame.
and I think like that's also like a great point, is like not all materials are created equal, right?
Hmm.
And so like what what are actually in the books? Like let's say you're bringing in books to your classroom, like what are the characters doing? Are they just there to say like, yep, we have this representation? Or are they like the scary character? Is it a true thing? Are they just seen as a hero? Is it, like why are they included? Is is it for the right reasons, or are the books kind of perpetuating this idea of ableism? And so I think that's also important. So I'm glad you kind of mentioned that,
Hmm.
because we all deserve to see ourselves in books and the curriculum. And so, you know, if not, like we as as K through 12 students, as parents, as families, like we might have to step in and like call the staff and faculty and whoever in versus out, and just say like, hey, here's this great resource. I know you're doing something for Black History Month. Could you also feature, someone who's Black and has a disability? I love that idea of like,
Hmm.
that's just something quick and easy to do, and it's not a huge change. And I think when we think about disability inclusive curriculum, we think like, oh gosh, I have to redo everything. I have to do that. And like it can be minor tweaks to
Right.
really make sure that people are represented and, not only the students themselves, but, you know, also their family members, their
Hmm.
parents, whoever else, like anyone in their kind of group of circle is represented and part of the curriculum that they're seeing and receiving.
Yes. And that leads to like my last question, which we are already talking about almost. And that is, how can using a disability inclusive curriculum support all learners? Which, again, I think we we have
Yeah,
already,
we kind of like transition there.
yeah, we all talked about that already. So
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
yeah. But I do think like, I work with a lot of general educators, current teachers that are in the field and also like pre-service educators, or, people that basically aren't going to school to be special educators or aren't special educators. Um, and some of them think like, oh, it doesn't really apply to me. Like I'm not going to be a special ed teacher. Or, oh, I won't have those students, right? Those students in
Hmm.
my classroom. Um, and so I always like to remind people like 14, percent of the school age population has a disability and receives special education services. And so this statistic comes from NCES, the National, I think it's Center for Educational Statistics. I probably butchered that, but um, NCES just last year. So we're talking about 7.3 million students in K through 12 schools.
Wow.
So when you think about it like that, it's like this is a huge group of students. This is a huge population that are not currently in most schools being represented in their curriculum. And so we really have to kind of push back and say, like, how can we include students not only in our schools, but also in our curriculum? Because this is going to not only help with representation, but it will also help kind of normalize the idea of a disability, that it's not this othering thing, it's not this thing to be scared of. And, again, that statistically people will, you know, experience lifetime in their or disability throughout their lifetime at some point.
Hmm.
I will also say like it can also help with this like idea of inspiration porn,
Hmm.
of like, oh, just, oh, they're so special, they're so this, and like, wow, we're gonna change the whole football game, and like, yes, they're included, and it's like that's not really inclusion. Like, like, oh, we just put a fake time and a fake score on the field so that they could be in the game one time, and it's like that's not inclusion.
Right.
um
It's nice, but
Exactly, yeah, like, it's great, and I'm sure that kid
it's
really
nice,
enjoyed
but
it. Yeah, but
yeah.
it's not inclusive, and
Right.
so, we don't need to. I always think of, like, prom season, like, how many videos are we gonna see of, um, like, "Oh, this person asked someone with a disability to prom," like, "Oh, they're such a great person." I'm like, "Just stop, like, this
Hmm.
is not okay."
Yeah.
Like, this ableist is so bad.
Yeah, and I think again it goes back to the way that disability is talked about and portrayed in the world at large, in the media, and
Mhm,
as as a bad thing. And as you
mhm,
said, that people with disabilities are in this other group. And um, rather than thinking of people, disabled people, as being just part of the human diversity, and they're just
mhm.
diverse, and another aspect of diversity. And so it's not a big, it wouldn't be such a big thing that a person without a disability is asking someone who is disabled to the prom. um
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's just like, yeah, as a disabled person, I went to my prom, and and I like to do things and go to parties and participate in events that my classmates are participating in. It's not
right.
it's nothing special about that. And
Yeah,
I just want to do what my classmates are doing. So I think,
exactly.
again, when and I, like you said, things have come a long way, and there's a long way to go in a lot of these areas. But as we continue, I'll say, to have these conversations like this about the importance of language and the way that we discuss disabilities, to to the children in our lives, and just as you're doing with the future educators that are coming through your courses at the college level, we can hopefully start seeing a bigger change in the way that disability is discussed and portrayed in movies, books, in the media, and the news, and wherever we have these interactions with people who have disabilities, because we are everywhere, and like we said, we are not going anywhere. We're here to stay.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, like, it not only is like 14% of the school age population, like, not only did they receive special education services or 504 plans, but I also think, like, if we think about mental health and the amount of disability that has happened in the last few years from like long COVID and the
Hmm.
effects of COVID on the body, like, this is only becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And so we have to address it. Like, you know, the CDC has said, like, that 1 in 5 students is diagnosed with a mental illness, and struggles with their mental health, but yet only 10% receive support. So again, we kind of have to normalize this conversation around disability, around mental health, around um, intersectionality, to really move this conversation forward. And yes, we can do it at the college level, but also with our K through 12 students, like, they are the ones that are going to take the next generation and make this change. So we have to kind of guide them and let them know that this exists, and it can be in small ways. It doesn't have to be this huge thing,
Hmm.
right? Although it'd be great if you had a whole unit on ableism. Like, I'm not stopping you if you want to do that, but
Right.
um like, go for it, please do. But even just having a book for a read aloud, that features someone with a disability, is a great starting point. So starting small, I think, can really make this huge impact going forward if we all do our little small part.
Yes. And with that, I will say thank you, Jessica. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed this, and
Thanks for
I
having me.
think, yeah, you're welcome. This was a good conversation to have, and it brought up a lot of memories and things for me, and it's really great to talk and to share these things out loud, and just recognize where things need to be improved, and how that's not always a difficult thing to do.
Mhm.
I think that's the important thing to mention, that changes can be made, and they won't cost a lot of money, and they won't
Yeah.
disrupt your lesson plan too much. If you're if you're a teacher, it can easily be you know uh, brought in as part of what you're already teaching, and just adding a few things, and to talk about disabilities a little bit more, and to talk about them in the right and correct ways. And yeah, so thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm very happy that we were able to have this conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Inclusion Think Tank podcast. This podcast is brought to you by New Jersey Coalition for Inclusive Education, NJCIE. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and don't forget to follow us on social media at NJCIE. Until next time.